Today, you're about to hear the shocking story of Hans Staden, a German who, in 1554, was captured by cannibals in colonial Brazil. 9 months of terror, horrifying rituals, and a fight for survival. How did he make it out alive? Stick with me as I dive into this jaw-dropping true story that unfolded right here in Brazil. Welcome to Brazil Uncovered. It's awesome to have you along for this journey into the stories that history often overlooks. We're stepping back to the mid-16th century, a time of grand expeditions and conquests. Brazil, freshly discovered by Europeans, was a land of mystery, with endless forests, indigenous tribes, and dreams of gold. By 1554, the Portuguese had already set up colonies, like São Vicente, an island near the mainland, where they lived alongside their ally, but the interior was ruled by other tribes, like the notorious for their cannibalistic rituals, a practice that terrified the colonizers. It was in this wild setting that Hans Staden, a daring adventurer from Hesse, Germany, decided to explore the new world. He dreamed of reaching the Indies, lands brimming with riches and adventure. From Seville, Spain, Staden boarded a ship bound for the De La Plata, but fate brought him to Brazil instead. Little did he know, this journey would plunge him into a nightmare, where his life would hang by a thread. On a sweltering day in 1554, Hans Staden was trekking through the forest near São Vicente. He had sent an enslaved man to hunt, and went to find him, hoping for food. But suddenly, the silence of the jungle was shattered by savage cries. Warriors, decked out in vibrant feathers and war paint, burst from all directions, armed with bows and arrows. Hans tried to run, but an arrow pierced his leg, and he collapsed, helpless. The warriors surrounded him, tore off his clothes, and left him naked, dragging him by the arms toward the sea. There, he saw the canoes and more warriors waiting on the shore. When they spotted him, they rushed over, shouting and pretending to bite their own arms, as if already savoring his flesh. Hans was bound, and the warriors began arguing over who would claim him. Some wanted to kill him right there and divide his body, but the leader, a man the others called King, decided to take him alive to their village. Why? He wanted the tribe's women to see Hans before the ritual where he would be sacrificed and devoured. Hans Staden was taken to Uatibia village with 7 huts perched on a hilltop. When he arrived, he was greeted like a trophy. Men, women, and children poured out of the huts to gawk at him, while women harvesting cassava in nearby fields swarmed around him, singing and dancing in a chilling ritual. They forced him to shout in their language, your food, have arrived. For the cannibalism wasn't just about eating it, was a sacred act, deeply rooted in their culture. They believed that by consuming an enemy, they absorbed their strength and avenged their tribe's fallen. Hans, mistaken for a Portuguese, their sworn enemy, was led to the main hut. There, the men drank kawé, a fermented brew, and sang to their wooden gods, the Tamaica. The women attacked him, yanking his beard and screaming that they'd avenge friends killed by colonizers. One used a piece of Cristo to scrape off his eyebrow, while others tied rattles to his leg, forcing him to dance to their chants. Every movement, every scream, was a grim reminder of the fate awaiting him, but they were also highly organized. They lived off fishing, hunting, and farming, and their villages were bound by family ties and rituals. Despite his fear, Hans began to observe their customs, a keen awareness that would later prove key to his survival. So, what do you think of this culture? Pretty wild, right? Brazil is packed with mysterious, hidden stories you won't find anywhere else. If you're hooked on tales like this, hit that subscribe button to dive into more incredible stories like this. Let's explore Brazil together. Hans Staden knew he had to fight to survive. They saw him as a Portuguese, their enemy, and were dead set on needing him to avenge the colonizers' attacks. But Hans was German, not Portuguese, and he knew the French, enemies of the Portuguese, were allies of the, bringing gifts like knives and mirrors. So, he pleaded, "I'm a friend of the French stone tea." A Frenchman lived just a few miles away, and when he arrived, Hans saw a glimmer of hope. But the Frenchman looked at him and told the natives, "He's Portuguese. Eat him." Desperate, Hans begged for the truth, and after 2 days, the Frenchman finally admitted Hans was German and a friend of the French, buying him some precious time. Even so, they kept planning his death. They watched him day and night, mocking him. One moonlit night, Hans saw the heads of enemies impaled on stakes around the village, and the warriors pointed at him, saying, "You're next." But then, something unexpected changed everything. A mysterious illness swept through the village. Children, women, and warriors started dying, one after another. Days earlier, Hans had mentioned that the moon looked angry with their huts, and now they believed his god was punishing them. The king, Chipipo, begged Hans to ask his god to heal them. Hans replied that if they spared his life, the divine wrath would stop. Chipipo promised to keep him alive, and slowly, the sickness faded. But Hans knew his life was still on the line. After months of fear and tension, Hans Staden's chance to escape finally arrived. One day, they heard gunshots at the port of It. A European ship had anchored there. Hans convinced the natives to take him to the port, claiming his brothers might be on the ship. When he arrived, 2 sailors found him. They saw Hans in a pitiful state, naked, wounded, and exhausted, and, to get him out without sparking conflict, the sailors pretended to be his brothers, telling me that Hans' father in Europe wanted to see him before he died. The king, who had kept Hans as a prisoner, was reluctant to let him go. Over the months, he had started to see Hans as a son. The king and one of his wives wept, begging Hans to return someday, while Hans played along, feigning emotion to keep up appearances. But deep down, he felt overwhelming relief. He boarded the ship, and as it sailed away from the shore, he looked back at the land that had nearly consumed him. After 9 months of captivity, Hans Staden was finally free, ready to return to Europe and share his story with the world. Hans Staden survived an experience few could even imagine. When he returned to Germany, he wrote a book about his journey, a gripping account that shocked Europe, and became one of the earliest detailed descriptions of Brazil and the indigenous peoples who lived here. But Hans' story also exposes a dark side of colonization. Contact with Europeans brought devastating diseases like smallpox and measles, which decimated the and other tribes. Decades after Hans' time, they were nearly wiped out, victims not only of disease but also of wars against the Portuguese, who enslaved or killed those who resisted. The culture Hans described with its rituals, dances, and beliefs was erased or transformed by the colonial advance. Today, Brazil bears these scars, a reminder of the human cost of European arrival. Hans Staden's saga shows us not only the courage of a man who survived the impossible, but also the impact of an encounter that forever changed our country. Now, let's check out some fascinating facts about Hans Staden. Did you know that Staden's book, published in 1557, was one of the first European accounts of Brazil's indigenous peoples and included detailed illustrations of the rituals he witnessed? Here's another tidbit. They didn't eat human flesh out of hunger, but as part of rituals of vengeance and honor, believing they absorbed their enemy's strength. And get this, Staden learned words in the language, like Kawai, the ceremonial drink used in their feasts, and even used this knowledge to communicate and negotiate his survival. This story reveals how 16th century Brazil was a place of encounters and conflicts, where vastly different cultures collided in both tragic and fascinating ways. Thanks so much for watching until the end. I hope you loved diving into this forgotten chapter of our history. Drop a comment below and let us know what you want to learn about this incredible country called Brazil. Subscribe to Brazil Uncovered so you don't miss a single video, and I'll see you next time.